Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Natalia Moczulska and this is the news. Yesterday, there was a massive hacking attack on a number of Polish portals, including niezależna.pl. Attempts were also made to block access to the trusted profile. Russian hacker groups were most likely behind the attacks. As Minister of Digitization, Janusz Cieszyński pointed out, this was another recent attempt at a cyber attack on government services. However, it was ineffective. The hackers tried to block the news portals. Such attacks on government sites, on financial sectors, go on practically all the time. Well, I think the difference is that simply the government sector or banks have more resources, and thus are able to deal with them and defend themselves effectively. Yesterday's attack disrupted several news portals and led to their temporary shutdown. The type of attacks were described as DDoS. Imagine a situation when all of us at one time are trying to log in to some service to check the information of interest to us. And such a DDoS attack is a similar type of attack, only that of course they are generated in a mechanical and purposeful way in order to prevent users from accessing a particular service. Yesterday's attack was likely the work of Russian hackers. Russia has been orchestrating cyber attacks ever since Putin came to power and realized what a powerful weapon the internet is, especially its ability to disrupt. These last few dozen hours of attacks are likely linked to the Ukrainian counteroffensive. The Russians are trying to preempt this and create confusion in the hinterland. Coordinated attacks by hackers are part of hybrid warfare. In many cases, hacking activities are aimed at finding weaknesses in individual elements, spreading chaos, reducing the level of security among citizens, weakening the position of the state and the state authorities, which are very much on the Ukrainian side. If the cyber attacks are not stopped early enough, they could lead to political destabilization in the country. I am convinced that this will not happen in Poland. We know about the attempt to influence election results in the US and the attempt to influence public opinion in the UK during Brexit. The Russians take every opportunity to meddle where they can meddle. A month ago, the European Commission adopted a proposal to create a European cybersecurity shield. This will enable efficient detection of cyber threats, as well as coordinated action in the community. The Commission expects the shield to be active from the beginning of next year. Earlier today, leaders of the world's advanced democracies started their G7 summit in Hiroshima. The G7 leaders took a tour to a peace memorial in the Japanese city leveled by an atomic bomb in World War II. The three-day gathering is expected to see leaders debate strategy on the more than year-long conflict in Ukraine and other global issues. Leaders of the world's richest democracies, members of the group of 7 rich nations, G7, have agreed to stiffen sanctions against Russia, while a draft communique to be issued after their talks in the Japanese city of Hiroshima stressed the need to reduce reliance on trade with China. On Ukraine, the G7 leaders said they had ensured that the embattled country had the budget to support Ukraine's needs for this year and early 2024. Today, we are taking new steps to ensure that Russia's illegal aggression against the sovereign state of Ukraine fails and to support the Ukrainian people in their quest for a just peace rooted in respect for international law, they said in a statement. The United States and the rest of the G7 economies will unveil new sanctions and export controls targeting Russia over its war against Ukraine, a U.S. official said ahead of the summit. Ukraine wants its allies to be bolder in imposing sanctions on Russia, including by targeting banks that provide financial services to serving soldiers, a senior advisor told Reuters. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said his government wanted pragmatic measures to prevent the circumvention of sanctions imposed on Russia. Great Britain published plans to ban imports of Russian diamonds, copper, aluminum, and nickel, and announced a new wave of sanctions against Russia, targeting companies connected to the alleged theft of Ukrainian grain. The draft version of the G7 communique on China said the leaders are prepared to build constructive and stable relations with China while acting in their national interests. U.S. President Joe Biden met Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and the two discussed ways to strengthen defense cooperation and counter coercive behavior by China, the White House said in a statement. On climate climate change, the G7 said they must take the lead in phasing out fossil fuels, attempting to build momentum for a global deal this year to gradually quit oil, coal, and gas. The G7 believes that publicly supported investment in the gas sector can be temporarily appropriate, while countries are accelerating the phasing out of their dependency on Russia, a draft communique seen by Reuters showed. The world is now facing multiple crises such as the climate crisis, the pandemic, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Under these circumstances, the G7, which shares fundamental values, must effectively respond to important issues facing the international community and lead the world. Meanwhile, a group of Japanese activists took to the streets in the western Japanese city of Hiroshima today to protest against the G7 leaders' summit and nuclear war. Flanked by police, some in riot gear, the protesters marched through a main street in central Hiroshima, not far from the Peace Memorial Park, where several G7 summit events were being held. Japan and the United States are trying to conduct a war of aggression on China. I am protesting because I absolutely cannot accept the fact that they are in Hiroshima, a place where an atomic bomb was dropped, trying to hold a meeting to start a nuclear war. U.S. President Joe Biden is in the land of Hiroshima, and he's brought a button along to fire a nuclear missile. I cannot forgive him for this. He needs to apologize to the people in Hiroshima. China is gravely concerned about recent signs of negative China-related moves at the G7 summit and urges Japan not to turn into a political show against or to curb China, the country's embassy in Japan said. European Council President Charles Michel said that the EU would continue to stay firm on human rights in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Tibet. The G7 has also called for a world without nuclear weapons, urging Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea to cease nuclear escalation and embrace non-proliferation, another statement released by the White House showed. Russia's nuclear rhetoric and stated intent to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus are dangerous and unacceptable, and Russia should return to full implementation of the New START treaty, the leaders said in the statement. A French plane is due to take Ukraine's President Zelensky from the Arab League summit in Saudi Arabia to Hiroshima for the G7 meeting. Zelensky is expected to arrive at the summit tomorrow on May 20th. Very important things will be decided there, and it is therefore the presence of our president that is absolutely essential in order to defend our interests. The G7 leaders sat down to a working dinner in Hiroshima as the first day of the leaders' summit drew to a close. The three-day summit in Japan, lasting until Sunday, May 21st, is expected to see leaders debate strategy on China's growing international might and the more than year-long conflict in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky attended a summit of the Arab League in Saudi Arabia earlier today to canvass support for his people, while Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman expressed his readiness to mediate in the war between Moscow and Kyiv. Earlier today, President Volodymyr Zelensky met with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and leaders from Oman, Kuwait, and United Arab Emirates in Jeddah, where he appealed for further cooperation to bring peace to his country. Zelensky, who is also due to attend a summit of the G7 leaders in the Japanese city of Hiroshima this weekend, thanked Saudi Arabia for its past help and said delegates would each receive the document of his 10-point peace plan. Last year, in a diplomatic coup, Crown Prince Mohammed secured the release of 10 foreigners captured by Russia and Ukraine. The move was apparently made possible by his close ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The freed prisoners also include a Croatian, a Moroccan, and a Swedish national, and were flown to Riyadh on a Saudi plane in September of 2022. In his address to the summit, Zelensky said some countries, including members of the Arab League, preferred to turn a blind eye to Russia's illegal annexation of Ukrainian land and to its jailing of some Ukrainians during the 15-month war. Zelensky also asked them to work with Ukraine directly without intermediaries.
And I'm also sure all your nations will understand the main call I want to leave here in Jeddah, a noble call to all of you to help protect our people, including Ukrainian Muslim community. For centuries, the Crimean Tatar have been and should remain an integral and strong part of the Muslim community of the world. But Crimea was the first to suffer from the Russian occupation. And until now, most of those who are subjected to repression in the occupied Crimea are Muslims. We already have a positive experience with Saudi Arabia regarding the release of our people captured by Russia. We can expand this experience. And even if there are people here at the summit who have a different view on the war on our land, calling it a conflict, I'm sure that we can all be united in saving people from the cages of Russian prisons. Unfortunately, there are some in the world and here among you who turn a blind eye to those cages and illegal annexations. I invite you to cooperate directly with our country without any intermediaries, and may our and your strengths act in a coordinated manner for the peace and good of people of all nations.
Saudi Arabia faced heavy criticism from the United States over a decision made by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or in short, OPEC, to cut oil production, seen as helping Russia to refill its coffers by boosting prices. Even though the October decision initially drew the ire of the United States and other Western countries, market dynamics since then have shown the cuts to be prudent. At a time when Russia's war on Ukraine has roiled global energy markets, the role the kingdom plays as the world's largest oil exporter has grown in importance to both the United States and Russia. World leaders have beat a path to Riyadh to ask for more oil production. Saudi Arabia has shown little readiness to join the effort to isolate Russia. It has stepped up its cooperation with Putin, including within the OPEC plus oil producers group. Gulf states have tried to remain neutral in the Ukraine conflict, despite Western pressure on Gulf oil producers to help isolate Russia, a fellow OPEC plus member. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please stay tuned for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and some of our other programs. But for me, it's have a wonderful weekend.